My dad weighed us every morning. If we gained even a pound, we were locked in the basement. My sister developed an eating disorder at 11. The scale in our hallway wasn't just a piece of bathroom equipment. It was an instrument of terror that governed every aspect of our childhood. Every morning at exactly 6:30 a.m., my father would call us from our bedrooms with the same cold, measured voice. Scale time. Emma first, then Sophie. I was 12 when this ritual began, and my younger sister Emma was 10. Dad had decided that obesity was a character flaw that needed to be prevented at all costs, and he'd appointed himself as our personal weight management specialist. The digital scale sat in the narrow hallway between our bedrooms, positioned so that there was no way to avoid seeing it every time we left our rooms. "Step up, Sophie," Dad would command, holding his little notebook where he recorded our daily weights with the precision of a medical researcher. "Arms at your sides. Stand still." The numbers that appeared on that LCD display determined whether we'd have a normal day or spend hours locked in our basement as punishment for the crime of gaining weight. Even a single pound increase from the previous day meant immediate banishment to the cold, dark space below our house, with only water and crackers until we'd learned our lesson about self-control. 109.2, Dad would announce, scribbling the number in his notebook. "That's up 0.7 pounds from yesterday. Can you explain that to me, Sophie?" "I don't know, Dad," I'd reply, my voice small and shaking. At 12 years old, I had no understanding of normal weight fluctuations, water retention, or the natural growth patterns of developing children. All I knew was that the scale had betrayed me again, and punishment was coming. "You don't know?" Dad's voice would grow colder. "You don't know why you gained weight? Maybe you'll have some time to think about it downstairs." The basement wasn't a finished recreation room or a cozy hideaway. It was a concrete box beneath our house in suburban Detroit, with stone walls that stayed cold even in summer, a single bare light bulb, and the constant smell of dampness and mold. There were no windows, no furniture except for an old folding chair, and no entertainment except for whatever we could create in our own minds to pass the hours. "Down you go," Dad would say, opening the heavy wooden door that led to the basement stairs. "When you come back up, I expect you to have thought seriously about your eating habits and your commitment to staying healthy." Emma's turn on the scale was always worse than mine because she was younger, smaller, and more visibly terrified of the daily weigh-ins. She would approach the scale like it was a wild animal that might attack her, tears already forming in her eyes before she even stepped onto the platform. 86.4, Dad would read from the display. "Up 1.2 pounds. Emma, this is unacceptable. What did you eat yesterday that you weren't supposed to eat?" "Nothing, Dad," Emma would whisper, though we both knew that protesting was useless. "I only ate what you gave me for meals." Then explain the weight gain. "Food doesn't just turn into body fat by magic. You must have eaten something extra, something you're not telling me about." The interrogations could last for 20 minutes while Emma stood on the scale, naked and shivering, trying to come up with explanations for natural biological processes that Dad refused to acknowledge. Sometimes he'd make her step off and on the scale multiple times, as if the numbers might change if she repositioned herself correctly. When both of us had gained weight on the same day, we'd be sent to the basement together, which was somehow both better and worse than being alone. Better because we could comfort each other and whisper quietly about how unfair our father was. Worse because we'd both be hungry, cold, and scared, amplifying each other's misery. "I hate him," Emma would whisper to me as we sat on the concrete floor, trying to stay warm by huddling together. "I hate the scale, I hate the basement, and I hate him." "Don't say that too loud," I'd warn her, even though I felt the same way. "If he hears you, he'll keep us down here even longer." The basement punishments could last anywhere from 3 hours to an entire day, depending on how much weight we'd gained and how angry Dad was about it. We were allowed water from a rusty sink in the corner, and sometimes he'd bring down a sleeve of saltine crackers if we were down there for more than 6 hours. But mostly, we just sat in the cold and tried not to think about how hungry we were. "This is for your own good," Dad would tell us when he finally let us out. Discipline and self-control are the most important qualities a person can develop. "Someday you'll thank me for teaching you these lessons while you're young." But I never felt grateful for the lessons. I felt confused, angry, and increasingly obsessed with food and weight in ways that seemed to contradict everything Dad claimed he was trying to teach us. Instead of learning healthy eating habits, I became fixated on the numbers on the scale, terrified of normal biological processes like growth and development. Our mother, Linda, was present in the house during these daily rituals, but she never intervened or questioned Dad's methods. She'd watch silently as he weighed us each morning, occasionally nodding approvingly when we'd lost weight or maintained the same number from the previous day. "Your father knows what he's doing," she'd tell us when we tried to complain about the weigh-ins or the basement punishments. "He's a successful businessman who understands discipline and goal setting. If you follow his guidance, you'll develop the self-control you need to be successful in life." Mom had her own complicated relationship with food and weight, constantly dieting and exercising to maintain what Dad considered an acceptable appearance for his wife. She'd stand on the same scale after we'd been weighed, recording her own numbers in a separate notebook, celebrating weight loss and punishing herself for weight gain through extra exercise or restricted eating. "See how your mother maintains her discipline," Dad would say when Mom's weight was down. "She understands that physical appearance reflects character. She doesn't make excuses or give in to weakness." The whole household revolved around weight management, calorie counting, and the daily drama of the morning weigh-ins. Meals were carefully planned and portioned, with specific foods banned entirely and others allowed only in measured quantities. Dad would sit at the dinner table with a calculator, adding up the calories in each item on our plates to ensure we weren't exceeding his predetermined limits. "Sophie, you can have 4 ounces of chicken breast, half a cup of steamed broccoli, and a small apple," he'd announce, using a kitchen scale to measure out my portions. "That's approximately 320 calories, which is appropriate for your size and activity level. Emma, you get 3 ounces of chicken, half a cup of broccoli, and no apple. Your smaller frame requires fewer calories, and you need to be more careful about maintaining your weight." At school, I watched other kids eat normal lunches with sandwiches, chips, cookies, and juice boxes, while I unwrapped my carefully portioned meal of raw vegetables and a small piece of grilled protein. Teachers sometimes asked if I was getting enough to eat, but I'd learned to deflect their questions with explanations about our family's commitment to healthy eating. "My dad's really into nutrition," I'd tell them. "He makes sure we eat the right foods in the right amounts. He used to be overweight when he was younger, so he doesn't want us to have the same problems." But the truth was more complicated than that. Dad had never been overweight. He'd been obsessed with fitness and appearance for as long as I could remember, and he decided to impose that obsession on his daughters as a way of ensuring we'd never experience the social and professional disadvantages he believed came with being heavy. "Overweight people are seen as lazy, undisciplined, and weak," he'd lecture us during our basement punishments. "They don't get the best jobs, they don't attract successful partners, and they don't command respect from others. I'm saving you from that fate by teaching you self-control now." The psychological pressure of the daily weigh-ins was intense and constant. I'd lie awake at night worrying about what the scale would say in the morning, trying to calculate whether I'd eaten too much during the day or whether my body was retaining water that would show up as weight gain. Emma seemed even more affected by the stress, developing nervous habits like picking at her cuticles and pulling out strands of her hair. "What if I gained weight?" she'd whisper to me in the dark after we'd gone to bed. "What if the scale says I'm heavier tomorrow?" "Don't think about it," I'd whisper back, though I was having the same worried thoughts. "Just try to go to sleep." But sleep was difficult when you were constantly anxious about your weight and terrified of being punished for normal biological processes. Both Emma and I became hypervigilant about everything we put in our mouths, weighing potential enjoyment of food against the risk of basement punishment. The system Dad had created was designed to make us afraid of our own bodies, suspicious of normal appetite, and ashamed of any weight gain regardless of the reason. Instead of teaching us healthy relationships with food and exercise, he was systematically destroying our ability to trust our own hunger cues and biological needs. When Emma turned 11, the daily weigh-ins had been part of our routine for over a year, and the psychological damage was becoming impossible to ignore. She'd developed a pattern of restricting her food intake to dangerous levels, sometimes eating only a few bites at each meal and then lying about feeling full or not being hungry. "I'm not hungry," became her standard response to any offer of food, even when her stomach was audibly growling and she looked pale and exhausted. Emma's really committed to maintaining her weight, Dad would say approvingly when she turned down snacks or asked for smaller portions. She's learned self-discipline faster than most adults. I'm proud of her dedication. But I could see that Emma wasn't demonstrating self-discipline. She was slowly starving herself out of terror that eating might cause weight gain that would result in basement punishment. What Dad saw as admirable commitment, I recognized as the beginning of something much more dangerous. Emma's eating became increasingly restrictive as she approached her 11th birthday. She'd push food around on her plate during meals, taking tiny bites and chewing each one slowly to make it look like she was eating more than she actually was. When Dad wasn't watching, she'd slip pieces of food into her napkin or hide them in her pockets to dispose of later. "I'm full," she'd announce after eating maybe a third of her already small portion. "I can't eat anymore." Excellent self-control, Dad would praise her, not noticing the way her clothes were starting to hang loose on her shrinking frame. Emma understands that it's better to eat less than to risk overeating. But I was starting to understand that Emma's behavior wasn't about self-control, it was about fear. She was so terrified of gaining weight and being sent to the basement that she'd rather go hungry than risk eating enough to maintain her health and energy. "Emma, you need to eat more," I'd whisper to her when we were alone. "You're getting too skinny. People are going to notice." "I can't," she'd whisper back. "What if I gain weight? What if Dad puts me in the basement for the whole day? I can't handle being down there anymore." The basement punishments had become more frequent and longer as both of us struggled with normal growth and development that Dad interpreted as lack of self-control. What should have been natural weight gain as we got older was treated as evidence of moral failure that required increasingly severe correction. "Girls your age need to be especially careful about weight management," Dad would lecture us during family meetings he'd started holding to discuss our progress. "This is when bad habits develop that can ruin your entire adult life. The discipline you learn now will determine whether you're successful and attractive women or whether you struggle with weight problems forever." Emma would sit silently during these lectures, nodding at the appropriate moments but looking increasingly hollow-eyed and fragile. She'd started wearing baggy clothes to hide how much weight she was losing, and she'd developed dark circles under her eyes that made her look sick and exhausted. "I think something's wrong with Emma," I told Mom one afternoon when Emma had fallen asleep on the couch immediately after school. "She's not eating enough, and she looks really tired all the time." "Your sister is fine," Mom replied dismissively. "She's just more naturally disciplined than most children. Your father says she's an excellent example of what proper self-control looks like. But she's not eating. She's losing too much weight. Sophie, you need to stop being jealous of your sister's success with weight management. Focus on your own discipline instead of criticizing hers." The suggestion that I was jealous of Emma's success was so wrong that I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't jealous, I was scared. Emma was disappearing in front of my eyes, and the adults in our house were treating her starvation as an achievement to be celebrated rather than a problem to be addressed. At school, Emma's teachers began expressing concern about her appearance and behavior. She'd started falling asleep in class, struggling to concentrate on lessons, and declining to participate in physical activities during recess and PE. "Emma seems very tired lately," her 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, mentioned to Mom during a parent conference. "She's also lost quite a bit of weight since the beginning of the school year." "Is everything okay at home?" "Emma is perfectly fine," Mom assured her. "Our family is very focused on healthy eating and proper nutrition. Emma has learned excellent self-discipline around food, which is why she's maintaining such a healthy weight." With respect, Mrs. Davis, Emma appears to be underweight for her age and height. "I'm concerned that she might not be getting adequate nutrition for proper development." "I think we know what's best for our own daughter," Mom replied coolly. "Emma is healthier now than she's ever been." But Emma wasn't healthy. She was sick in ways that went beyond physical starvation, developing psychological patterns around food that would affect her for the rest of her life. The daily weigh-ins had taught her to see her body as an enemy that couldn't be trusted, food as a danger that needed to be avoided, and hunger as a weakness that needed to be suppressed. "I'm scared to eat," she confided to me one evening as we got ready for bed. "Even when I'm really hungry, I'm scared that if I eat what I want, I'll gain weight and Dad will be angry." But you're losing too much weight, I told her. You're getting too skinny. That's not healthy either. I know, she said quietly. But I can't stop. Every time I think about eating more, I think about the scale in the basement, and I just can't do it. Emma had developed what I now recognize as anorexia nervosa, though at the time I had no name for what was happening to her. All I knew was that my little sister was wasting away in front of me, and the system our father had created to keep us healthy was slowly killing her. The turning point came on a Monday morning in November when Emma fainted during the daily weigh-in. She'd stepped onto the scale as usual, but before Dad could read the numbers, she collapsed onto the floor, hitting her head on the hallway wall as she fell. Emma, I screamed, dropping to my knees beside her unconscious form. Mom, Dad, something's wrong with Emma. Dad seemed more annoyed than concerned about Emma's collapse. She probably just stood up too fast, he said, checking the scale to see what her weight had been before she fainted. 107.3. She's lost another pound since yesterday. Excellent progress. Dad, she's unconscious, I said, shaking Emma's shoulder gently. She needs help. She'll be fine in a minute. This happens sometimes when people are losing weight successfully. Her body is just adjusting to being healthier. But Emma didn't wake up in a minute. She remained unconscious for almost 10 minutes, and when she finally came to, she was disoriented and weak, unable to stand without assistance. I'm taking her to the doctor, Mom announced, though she seemed reluctant to acknowledge that anything was seriously wrong. She might be coming down with a virus or something. Dr. Sarah Kim, Emma's pediatrician, took one look at my sister and immediately ordered blood tests and a comprehensive physical examination. Emma's weight had dropped to dangerous levels, her blood pressure was low, and she showed signs of malnutrition that were impossible to ignore. Mrs. Davis, Emma is severely underweight for her age and height, Dr. Kim told Mom during a consultation that I was allowed to hear because Emma requested my presence. Her BMI is in the 5th percentile, which indicates significant nutritional deficiency. What has her eating been like at home? She eats very healthy foods, Mom replied defensively. Our family is committed to proper nutrition and weight management. Emma has been very disciplined about maintaining a healthy weight. Maintaining a healthy weight and being underweight are two different things, Dr. Kim said firmly. Emma needs to gain weight immediately, and she needs psychological support to address what appears to be an eating disorder. Eating disorder? Mom repeated. That's ridiculous. Emma just has excellent self-control. Mrs. Davis, your daughter has lost approximately 15 pounds over the past 3 months. That's not self-control, that's starvation. If this continues, Emma could face serious health consequences including heart problems, bone loss, and cognitive impairment. Dr. Kim's words seemed to penetrate Mom's denial in a way that months of obvious symptoms hadn't. For the first time, she appeared to understand that Emma's weight loss wasn't a success to be celebrated but a medical emergency that required immediate intervention. What do we need to do? Mom asked quietly. Emma needs immediate nutritional rehabilitation under medical supervision, and your family needs to work with specialists who understand eating disorders. The patterns that led to this situation need to be identified and changed, or Emma's condition will only get worse. The drive home from the doctor's office was silent except for Emma's quiet crying in the backseat. Mom gripped the steering wheel tightly, perhaps finally beginning to understand that the weight management system Dad had imposed on our family had nearly killed her younger daughter. Are you going to tell Dad what the doctor said? I asked Mom as we pulled into our driveway. I don't know, she replied honestly. Your father is going to be very upset about this. He's going to say the doctor doesn't understand our family's commitment to health and fitness. But Emma could die if she doesn't start eating more, I said. The doctor said so. I know, Mom said quietly. I know. That evening, Mom and Dad had a heated argument behind their closed bedroom door while Emma and I sat in the living room, trying to hear what they were saying about her condition and our family's future. Doctor says she's underweight. Mom's voice carried through the door. Doctors don't understand discipline. Dad's voice was angry and defensive. Could die if she doesn't gain weight. Overreacting to normal healthy weight loss. The argument continued for over an hour, with Mom apparently trying to convince Dad that Emma's condition was serious and Dad insisting that medical professionals didn't understand the importance of weight control and self-discipline. When they finally emerged from their bedroom, Dad's expression was grim and angry, while Mom looked exhausted and defeated. Family meeting, Dad announced. Living room. Now, Emma and I sat on the couch while our parents took chairs facing us, and Dad began what would be the most important conversation of our childhood. Your mother has told me about her conversation with Dr. Kim, Dad said, his voice carefully controlled. Apparently, some people think Emma's weight loss is a problem rather than an achievement. The doctor says I'm too skinny, Emma said quietly. She says I need to eat more or I could get really sick. Doctors sometimes don't understand the difference between being thin and being healthy, Dad replied. They're used to treating overweight patients, so they think everyone needs to gain weight. But Dad, I interjected, Emma fainted this morning. That's not normal. That's not healthy. People faint for lots of reasons, Sophie. It doesn't necessarily mean anything is wrong with Emma's weight. But even as Dad defended his position, I could see doubt creeping into his expression. Emma's collapse that morning had shaken him more than he wanted to admit, and Dr. Kim's warnings about serious health consequences were apparently harder to dismiss than he'd expected. The doctor wants Emma to see a specialist, Mom said quietly. Someone who treats children with eating problems. Emma doesn't have an eating problem, Dad insisted. She has excellent self-control and discipline around food. She's starving herself, I said, surprised by my own boldness in contradicting Dad so directly. She's scared to eat because she's afraid of being punished for gaining weight. That's not self-control, that's fear. Dad stared at me for a long moment, perhaps seeing his weight management system through different eyes for the first time. The daily weigh-ins, the basement punishments, the constant focus on the numbers on the scale, all of it had created exactly the opposite of what he'd claimed he wanted to achieve. Maybe, he said slowly, we need to adjust our approach to health and nutrition. It wasn't an admission of wrongdoing or an apology for the damage he'd caused, but it was the closest thing to acknowledgement we'd ever get from him. The daily weigh-ins were quietly discontinued, the basement punishments ended, and Emma began working with a team of specialists who helped her slowly, carefully rebuild her relationship with food. But the damage had been done. Emma's eating disorder would affect her for years, requiring ongoing therapy and medical monitoring as she struggled to overcome the fear of food and weight gain that Dad's system had created. She'd learned to see her body as an enemy and eating as a dangerous activity that needed to be carefully controlled and restricted. I learned different but equally damaging lessons about food, weight, and self-worth that would influence my relationships and self-image well into adulthood. The message that our value as people was determined by numbers on a scale, that normal biological processes were failures of character, and that love and approval were conditional on maintaining specific physical standards. Today, more than 15 years later, Emma still struggles with disordered eating patterns and an unhealthy relationship with food. She's been in therapy for over a decade, working to overcome the psychological damage caused by years of weight-based punishment and the message that her worth as a person was determined by her ability to maintain an artificially low body weight. Dad never apologized for the system he created or acknowledged the harm it caused to both of his daughters. He still believes that discipline and self-control around food are essential character traits, though he no longer weighs anyone or sends people to basements for gaining weight. I was trying to teach you girls important life skills, he said when the subject has come up in family conversations. Maybe my methods weren't perfect, but my intentions were good. But good intentions don't undo the damage caused by psychological abuse disguised as health education. Good intentions don't restore the years Emma spent starving herself out of terror, or repair the trust that was broken when our father turned our own bodies into weapons against our self-worth. The scale in our hallway is long gone, replaced by normal bathroom equipment that serves its intended purpose without terrorizing anyone. But the lessons we learned during those daily weigh-ins, about conditional love, about the danger of trusting our own bodies, about the price of gaining even a single pound. Those lessons have proven much harder to remove from our lives. Some families teach children to fear strangers or dangerous situations. Our family taught us to fear ourselves, our appetites, and our own biological needs. And that kind of fear, once learned, can take a lifetime to unlearn.